I'll introduce myself. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming to the library for the presentation I have concerning my father, who was a pilot, who was also a historian, author, and a sailor. And he'd been doing lots of sailing. Is technology working? I'm going backwards.
Can you start it again?
Yes. Oh, isn't it nice to know that dummies are dummy? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you very much for coming to attend my presentation concerning my father, Douglas T. Peck. He was an author as well as a historian. He was a pilot for the United States Air Force and was a sailor. He was born in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and as a young man when he was in high school, this picture was, he loved to make models, and model airplanes was one of the things he did. And after he graduated from Hume-Fogg High School in Nashville, Tennessee, and then he later went to Parks Air College in St. Louis, Missouri, and got his degree in aeronautical engineering. He worked for Bradenton Airlines as a mechanic, and then later he worked for them as a pilot because he obtained his commercial pilot's license by then. My dad met my mother, Rebecca Wilder, at a social in the late 30s, and their courtship continued through the early 40s. But World War II put a hold on the matrimony, and so they had to wait a little while before they could get hitched. And during the war, my dad flew P-38s, which is the center bottom plane, P-39s, as well as the P-47, which is the top right. And he was also a standby pilot for the bombers of the B-50-24s. He was certified to fly multi-prop planes, which was your P-38s and P-39s, so he could fly bomber missions too. A couple of his buddies, actually 5 of them, they decided to take a little side trip to Cairo to visit the pyramids. The dad is the second camel from the left. The only problem they had was during the war, Egypt was under the British rule for the war, and he was an American fighter, and he was out of his district. So needless to say, a little hot water was received when he got back. While my dad was viewing the pyramids in Egypt, well, my mother, Rebecca, she was a volunteer gray lady in Guam. You could see there's a battleship behind her in the photograph. And then after the war, which was in 45, my parents got married in Nashville, Tennessee on May 17th, 1946. And in September 18th, 1947, this is when the Air Force was born. It was before then, it was the Army Air Corps. And they separated the Army Air Corps from the Army, formed what they call as the United States Air Force. And so my dad join then because he flew for the Army Air Corps and didn't care for it, but he thought that flying for the Air Force would be better. So he joined, and they immediately sent him to flight school. Only problem he had was he had twice the hours his instructor did. After flight school, my dad received orders to go to Clark Air Force Base, Manila, Philippines. And my mother and I, well, we weren't exactly welcome right away. It took about 9 months later, and we were able to join him. Then after he finished his tour in the summer of '51, we moved to California, and that's where my sister was born. And then we then got transferred to Greenville, South Carolina, then to Smyrna, Tennessee, and then finally to Maxwell Air Force Base, Montgomery, Alabama. But while we're in Alabama, Dad found a yachting ad in the magazine for renting a cottage and learning how to sail. This guy offered boats and a cottage. So we went to Southport, Florida, which is near Panama City. And that's where my father learned how to sail, and there's me in the boat with him. So, but in July of 1957, he received orders to go to Europe. And off we go to the first country, which was Warrington, England. The picture on the left is a picture of the house that we lived in. The picture on the right is an interesting picture. That's a model locomotive that runs off of real steam. It's called a live steam locomotive, and my dad made it. He used all his skills as an airplane mechanic to make the train. It runs off 80 pounds of steam pressure. And this particular train could pull 6 adults. And you can see me riding on the flat car behind him. And that's my sister who's trying to run on the inside to keep up with the train. We were then sent to Châteauroux, France, and we were there for 1 year because Charles de Gaulle decided that he wanted to close all the American bases, and so we had to leave. And when we left, we went to Wiesbaden, Germany. My sister's standing in front of the world's largest cuckoo clock. You go in, and they got all kinds of cuckoo clocks there. The German town there, I believe, is Rudesheim, which is on the Rhine River. And after we left Europe in 1960, we were transferred to Langley Air Force Base, Hampton, Virginia. A lot of people might think it's the CIA one up in Alexandria, but it's not. It's down in Virginia. And Langley was the Tactical Air Command of TAC bases. My dad was the chief maintenance officer for all Tactical Air Command. He had 12 bases. They had to make sure all the jets were up and flying. A lot of people didn't know, but also at this time, NASA was located there because NASA didn't move out to Houston until much later. And so my sister and I, we went to school with the astronaut kids, and we've been able to meet a lot of the Mercury 7 astronauts. Of course, in 1960, when we got there, my dad did not waste time in buying a boat. He bought a boat within 2 months after we got there, and he docked it at the Langley Yacht Club in the Back River, and that's where we did a lot of sailing. That's where I learned how to sail myself. It was cold that day, too. We went out to, you can't see it, but over on the other side, there's a chunk of ice kind of floating. It's kind of, we were out there to, break up the ice so it wouldn't damage the boat. But it was a Dickerson 26, so we sailed it all over the Chesapeake Bay. Then in 1964, my dad got orders to go to Thailand. He decided to retire to Florida instead. And I gotta say is thank you, Dad. I would have spent my my high school days in a boarding high school in Wiesbaden, Germany, if we had gone there. But anyway, we traveled, took the boat down the intercoastal to Bradenton. My parents had already had property here in Bradenton in Palmasola Park. So he decided it's time to quit. The Goonie Bird II, which he bought in April of '64, and we sailed it down from Virginia. And here are pictures of my parents. And then you'll see the last little bit, and that was my dad was rescued by the Coast Guard off of the Louisiana oil derricks in a Hurricane L.L.C. with 25-foot seas and 75-mile-an-hour winds. So he spent one of his lives there, and the Coast Guard rescued him. And the boat sank a week later. But having that said, we got Goonie Bird 3. And Goonie Bird 3 was launched in 1977. My dad bought the hull and the deck from Ryder Company. It's a Southern Cross 31. And the interior of the boat my dad built. He put in the floorboards, the bunks, the head, the shower, everything. He also added the masts and boom, and he got the mast came from Charlie Morgan, who's a local boat builder here in St. Petersburg. And so we launched the boat in '77, and the boat has traveled. The picture over here was of my dad at the start of the Newport Bermuda race. He came in first class in his class. There were 3 other Southern Crosses, and he came in first place. And it got so rough he couldn't take the jib down, so that's why he came in first place, because he couldn't shorten sail. The next picture to the right is the Goonie Bird sitting in the Azores Islands with all his flags, and he spent a little time there. But this is what got him interested in his exploration as a historian. I remember even when I was packing up to go to Europe, I packed several books on Christopher Columbus. So this wasn't a fling or anything like that. He's always had a genuine interest in, as his personal hero was Christopher Columbus. Then in November of '78, National Geographic's, 86, National Geographic's came out with this magazine article about Christopher Columbus. And the Lewis Martin, who's in the middle there, he wrote an article for National Geographic's on following his log using a computer. And National Geographic's determined that Columbus landed at the island of Samana Cay, which is 65 miles south of where my dad said it was. That's San Salvador. And of course, the leading Columbus expert, Kelly, said that it was San Salvador. In this article, there was a little interesting thing that came up. They used 2.78 for the definition of a league, and my dad liked 2.67, but for his experiment, he wanted to use National Geographic's information. He obtained a copy of the L.L.C log. L.L.C was the representative from the government of Spain who went on the boat, and Columbus reported the time and position and how fast we're going to L.L.C. And the log was retranslated by National Geographic, and National Geographic provided my dad with a copy of the log, because this is what was in the paragraph that started the whole thing, and that is, someone now got in a sailing vessel, departed from the Canary Islands in September, and steered Columbus's courses. They could determine where he landed. And my dad said, "That's for me." So off he goes. Before he went sailing after Columbus, he did take a trip in 1985 from Bradenton to Bradenton, viva the Canary Islands. And in this trip, he discovered that the Goonie bird went the same speed as the Santa Maria. The next voyage in '87 from to Palos to San Salvador, this is when he used National Geographic's information. He fell 39 miles short of San Salvador, which was due west of him. And the reason for not hitting the island accurately was because of the definition of how much a league was. Then he went to Puerto Rico and went to Melbourne. And this is the retracing of Ponce Leon. And then after that, he went back to Spain. And when he, in '91, he retraced Columbus again and used his own definitions. And his navigation was accurate. He returned back to Spain and the Azores in '92 to participate in the Quincentennial celebration. And he sailed across again in '92. Navigation, the main instrument was called a quadrant. Popular belief, the sextant was not used because it wasn't invented. It was 100 years later, in the 16th century, that the sextant was used. I'll have a picture of the quadrant. Columbus was a time, rate, and distance person, which means that he did his navigation by what we call his dead reckoning. Magnetic variation is something that those sailors knew about. And the magnetic variations were part of Dad's compensation of knowing what course to steer. Again, we had the league, the ever-famous league. Currents, well, you know, they didn't know about currents. The Gulf Stream was unknown. There was a northern equatorial current off of Africa was unknown, because we got a lot of people going across the Atlantic and they don't know about these things. And so currents really didn't play much of a factor. In fact, they were largely ignored. Leeway is something that points something out. You know how a big wave comes by and it lifts the boat up and the wave moves over and comes back down? It moves the boat. National Geographic put a lot of emphasis on leeway, and they started the leeway back in the middle of the Atlantic, and that's how they got further south. because they didn't think about the leeway on closer to Africa. And my dad discovered that the leeway canceled out each other. So it really didn't make, because they got pushed further north on the first part of the Atlantic, and they got pushed further south on the south part of the Atlantic. Charts and maps, good luck. SO stations weren't invented then, so they couldn't get a map. There were no charts. There were no maps. This is what a quadrant looks like. You can see a picture of my dad using it. I got a better picture here. Here he is using a quadrant. Notice the string coming down. You take the line, he's looking up the line of the sight at the sun, and the plumb bob hangs down, and you can see where the measurement is. And Columbus said that his quadrant was broken, and he didn't like to use it. How simple of a thing is that, and how could it break? And then there's my dad's cat, Hooker. Here is I mentioned to you the magnetic variation of the North Atlantic back in the 16th century. So Dad knew how much variation there was depending upon where he was in the Atlantic. A league. I read one story that said that's how far a Roman legion can march in 1 hour. Then this one up here that I found said this is how far a person can walk in 1 hour. Now, as you know, people have different pace and lengths. And at sea, a league was often considered 3 nautical miles. National Geographic said it was 2.82. Other sources said it was between 2.3 to 3.4. James Kelly, who is one of the leading authorities on Columbus, came up with a league being 2.67, and my dad used his definition. But after my dad did all of the navigation and everything, he recomputed a lot of things, and he found that 2.69 was a more accurate description of how long a league is. Here's the chart of National Geographic and the Goonie Bird, with Dad following Columbus's log and National Geographic having their track too. Remember, that was done by a computer. And Lewis Martin did one little sneaky thing, because as you know, with computers, you can retype in distances and change the results. And he did that several times, because he tried out several different links until he finally got land, which was Samana Cay. And that's because he said the leeway with the southern trade winds blew the boats further south. Here's the cat. Hooker was, as you can see, in control. He was the transatlantic cat. Hooker's main duty while on the open sea was to keep the boat free of flying fish. My dad did discover savings on cat food. My dad did like to get dressed up in character a little bit as for Columbus, but then the cat also escaped from the boat too. Now, if we have any stamp collectors out there, this is what is called as a cachet envelope. And a cachet envelope means there's printing on the left-hand side. Okay? And so this was all pre-printed, and if you notice the postage stamp, the 500th anniversary of Columbus, and this was made by the Knights of Columbus in Columbus, Wisconsin. who did a great deal of supporting my father as he did his travels. And they also helped publish his book on Columbus. This is a map of Ponce de Leon's trip from Puerto Rico up to Florida. And Ponce de Leon landed at San Salvador, which is the island listed as number 7 there. My dad hit the island right on the money. He hit it right on the money with his Columbus log and with Ponce de Leon's log. Here you have 2 logs by 2 different navigators, one from a south going north, the other one's east going to the west. By landing at the same island, he discovered that his navigation of following the logs was accurate. It gave a great deal of credence to the accuracy and findings. San Salvador is halfway between Puerto Rico and Florida. So when Dad continued the sailing, following Ponce de Leon's log, he ended up Melbourne Beach. Contrary belief, St. Augustine, no. You got the wrong city. Melbourne, according to my father. My dad has always been accused of looking like Willie Nelson. And when he was in North Carolina, he had this lady come up to him about 4 times with a piece of paper and a pencil and ask for his autograph. So my dad finally, in disgust, said, "Okay, lady, give it to me and I'll sign it." That lady has a piece of paper of Willie Nelson's forged signature by my dad. One thing he was proud of, and that is National Geographic did consult him when they made this chart of the Spanish explorers. They took his route of Ponce de Leon and added to it. And so you will notice the ending part up there where Ponce de Leon comes up is at Melbourne, which is below Cape Kennedy, or Cape Canaveral as we used to call it. So even National Geographic acknowledges that my dad's findings for Ponce de Leon is there. He is also very proud of this, and that is a sign that was put up on Melbourne Beach. This is in front of the public beach that's there about the 27th latitude, where my dad said Ponce de Leon landed, and in his book he said Ponce de Leon landed within 5 to 8 miles of this area. Because he also said that I asked him how was the quadrant. He said it was within 40 miles. GPSs are more accurate. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you very much for your attention. I hope you learned something. And if you have any questions, I'll be glad to entertain them.
Just one moment. If whoever asks has any questions, what we need to do is for you to repeat them. Because
Okay.
the mic is not going to pick it up.
Right.
Okay, and then also we would like to introduce John Hayes, basically, who's actually a descendant.
John, stand up so people can see you. We may as well do that now. Go ahead.
Well, he's going to do that. He's going to put on the helmet and everything.
Okay.
He'll talk right next to you a little bit about what we're doing with the documentary. I want to thank all of you for coming out here. We're just keeping, I'm actually a historian out of Melbourne, and what we're doing, and I'm also the president of the Manatee Bridge, which is the organization that's actually doing the documentary, the film company that's out here. They're from Orlando, and basically what we're going to be doing is at the end of the day is doing this documentary that's going to correct history. We also are doing the Muppets And that's one of them that just came in from Puerto Rico. And there's going to be a series of them, and that's what we're going to be using to basically go into the schools and teach children in the school system about the voyage, so that we can later on turn this whole thing around so people can get a proper definition of what happened and with the voyages and all of that other stuff. So once again, whoever's going to ask a question,
I'll repeat it.
Take questions and then you can answer.
Okay, Bob, you had a question?
I did. I've had the pleasure of having twice your father give presentations when we were members there with you guys at the Bradenton Yacht Club. And the one story that rings so true, and that you've mentioned Hooker a couple of times in here, but as I recall one part of his story, on one of the voyages he acquired Hooker somewhat as a stray cat, and Hooker kept getting on his boat. And on this one voyage, Hooker goes to where he shows up for the big celebration of hundreds of years, and as he arrives and he gets to land, and as I recall the story, in Spanish, of course, where he was going for that celebration, the headlines were essentially, it says, Columbus Voyager arrives with Hooker. Do you recall that?
Yep, I recall that. And I even got a copy of the article in Spanish. Yes, ma'am.
I also had the pleasure of hearing him speak at the yacht club. And I was trying to get the full facts about Hooker and the Spanish, and it was wonderful. But what a marvelous life he had. And it's just so interesting.
Oh, yes, he's definitely had a character. He had an interesting life. A lot of people realize that, you know, he got rescued by the Coast Guard. He also crash-landed his Piper Cub back in the 30s. He got shot down twice in World War II. But a lot of people don't know, and that is, I mentioned about the astronauts and everything. When the Air Force and Army and Navy and the Marines scrambled to get candidates for the to become astronauts, they came up with a group of 30 test pilots. And out of this 30 became the Mercury 7. My dad was one of the 30. He got washed out because of age very early in life, but he was very adventurous. He flew jets, helicopters, multiple prop planes, single prop planes, and not only that, he could repair them. He had a FAA license for fuselage and for all of the different engines for the airplanes.
Plane engine into a car.
Oh yeah, in Nashville, my dad had several Piper Cubs, and he took a Piper Cub engine out of the airplane and put it in this car. And the car made a lot of noise. It didn't have much pickup because, as you know, engines in airplanes, you know, they're powerful, but they take so long to get going. And so he couldn't out-drag anybody. But boy, he had the sound.
There's one other amazing feat that I think is worth mentioning, is that on one of his voyages, he left Bradenton, I guess, went across and saw the shores of the land and turned around, never stopped, and returned to our...
Yeah, he did that in '85 when he left Bradenton to sail around the Canary Islands, and that's when he decided to race Columbus. And he lost by a day because he got becalmed. And that's when he discovered that his boat can go the same speed as the Santa Maria. And he went...
No ice, but he lived on rum or something?
Yeah. Well, he learned to drink rum warm. Ice ran out about the second day.
What became of Goonie Bird 3?
Goonie Bird 3 is now located in Melbourne, proudly to say. Sam Lopez is going to is going to get a museum of Ponce de Leon built there, and the Goonie bird is going to be part of the museum sitting next to it. So last year I donated the boat to Sam and shipped it over.
That's wonderful.
Yes, sir.
It's apparent that your father sailed alone quite a bit.
Oh, yes.
Did he ever make any of these voyages with crew?
No,
No? And
with a cat.
with and how did your mother abide by that?
Well, she abided by it real easy. When Dad was sailing to Spain, Mom went down the Yangtze River in China. And did that twice. Went to South America twice. Got the house recarpeted. Bought a car. It was she did her own thing, and Dad did his. And every time Dad come back, he just how much.
And just a follow-up, so he sailed Bradenton to the shore and then back. How long does that take?
Oh, it took him. It took him a couple of months because he first had to sail over there. He went around the north side of the Canary Islands and got close to the south side where Columbus left the Canary Islands. And then it was 34 days from the Canary Islands to the Bahamas. And then from the Bahamas, he took around. So he's gone for a couple of months. But we were kind of used to that. He was always gone.
Thank you.
You didn't take your mom and summers.
My mom did join him once. You saw the race to Bermuda that I had the picture. Mom flew to Bermuda, and she got on the boat and sailed with him. My parents would take their annual summer vacations going up and down the west coast of Florida, and my mom taught school, and I always get a call from my parents about 3 days before school start. Would you pick your mother up? We are located, and then it was Key West, Melbourne, Beaufort, North Carolina. Drove to Pensacola. I mean, yeah, I drove a lot to get my mom picked up so she can go to school, because I was also a teacher and had to go to work too. She taught phys ed for 20 years at Ballard Elementary.
Good job.
Sam, would you come on up now and
Yes.
hi, Ponce. Ponce de Leon here. He is actually what, a 14 generations from being a descendant of Ponce de Leon.
Thank you.
And he's been researching him, finding out everything, and giving Sam Lopez and myself lots of information about Ponce de Leon. Go ahead.
He's also a genealogist. He's our genealogist in our organization, and he's got a book that's he's published. It's about that thick. I think it's here today that he can show you guys the book. And he has been doing a lot of work with us. And so what we want to do now is incorporate everything that we have done, and that's the book. And you can see his extensive work. He knows how to read the Spanish, because he is Spanish from that era. And so he's able to translate all the information that people, all these past historians have not been able to translate accurately. So we have a next 10 to 15 years of information now that we can actually start printing and having information basically written up with accuracy. And all that information, a lot of it has come from the archives of Spain. And so John is excellent in what he does, and he's been a tremendous help to all of us. So this thing is not going to die. What we're going to do is revisit and just bring things up to speed and up to date. And giving the American people basically another snapshot of history, and to make things accurate. So it's an incorporation of basically making history, making it come alive. And that's what we're doing in Melbourne. We have a 15-foot statue that we put up of Juan Ponce de Leon on Melbourne Beach at Juan Ponce de Leon Park. And I've worked on that project now, it's going on 14 years, together with Frank Thomas and actually Doug Peck. And now I have the privilege to work with his son, which is great, so that we can continue doing all of this. So it's a lifetime of work. So when people see what Doug has done, and now what I've spent 14 years and working on this and continuing to work on it, and now John has worked with us, and now his son is working with us, so it's not going to go away. So we're going to continue making these actual fact findings that we're finding in Spain, making them come alive. Whether it's through motion picture, whether it's through having Muppets on stage, educating children. So it's a work in progress. John, you want to talk a little bit about who you are and what you've done?
I'm John J. Brown, a 14th great-grandson of Juan Ponce de Leon. My wife is taking pictures back there. She's the 15th great-granddaughter of Juan Ponce de Leon. When we met in the Bronx, we didn't know each other. I started doing genealogy and history when I was 14 years of age. During my work, I created a book. What motivated me was I got sick and tired of people saying Juan Ponce de Leon, the son of poor noblemen, okay? They never articulated who his parents were. His parents were Lope Ponce de Leon y Gonzalez. His mother was Catalina Pereira y Carrizosa. All right? You will take that away with you now. In my work, I started, you can consider me an armchair historian, okay? I'm not a navigator. Antonio de Herrera wrote about Juan Ponce de Leon's logs. He said 30 degrees, he ended up in St. Augustine, right? He didn't say St. Augustine, but the people in St. Augustine picked up on the 30 degrees. I started questioning that historical document that Antonio de Herrera wrote. I read it back and forth, and I came up with my own little calculations in my own non-navigational way using mathematics. I came up with 27 degrees. In my book, I say he landed in Melbourne. I've divorced myself from other history books because, to be honest, it's downright trash. I have a history book there that ended up in the public schools, and they talk about Ponce de Leon landing in St. Augustine, somewhere between St. Augustine and Melbourne. That guy couldn't pin it down. And he had a lot of errors in his history, talking about Juan Ponce de Leon being the governor of Higüey, Dominican Republic. Not true. And the history books are all wrong. So if you're interested, this is the correct history book, taken from the archives of Spain, original documents. The genealogy is derived from original documents. And the history of his travel from Puerto Rico to Melbourne is in here.
My
The
dad
patent.
also found the 2 degrees mistake because it was made at the site of where they left Puerto Rico. And he discovered that 2 degrees error all the way to Florida.
Right. Now in 1511, there was a map. The king mentions in his patent Bimini. Where did the king get Bimini from? He probably got it from that 1511 map. Ponce de Leon, my great-great-great-grandfather, probably knew where he was going, okay? And the patent prevented him from claiming any land that the Portuguese had because that Portuguese king was the cousin of Fernando, all right? And he was restricted from claiming any land that Columbus had
Claimed.
discovered. So he couldn't go to those places. So he had to stop at different places. And he stopped at San Salvador because they needed water. It was a necessity. So he ended up in Melbourne. The current got him to Melbourne. Alaminos, his pilot, discovered the current. What's the name of that current
The
again?
Gulf Stream. It was, they called it at that time the Florida Stream.
Right, right, the Florida Stream, the jet stream. Well, anyway, they ended up there and they found that it took them back home, right? So Alaminos discovered that. But it's Ponce de Leon's because he was the captain of the ship. So there's a lot of history that's going to be corrected with this documentary. And I'm proud to be part of it.
Thank you, John. I think we're done. Thank you.
Alrighty.
History, are you going to correct some of what your countrymen did to the Native people?
Well, okay, that's another story.
Oh, not very long.
What they missed was Ponce de Leon freed the Taino Indians in 1520. He badgered the king of Spain, him and Antonio de la